Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Previously we were talking about sources of fiqh which are not mainstream or about which there is a difference of opinion. We mentioned three: istishab, istihsan and istislah, which was the al-maslahatul mursala. Let us now make mention of three more which are not the main ones. So the next one, so this makes it the fourth one, is shar'u man qablana, the sharia of those who were before us. Can we take the sharia of those who were before us as a source of law for us? And the weightier opinion here is that yes, we can, unless there is an element in the sharia of those who were before us which contradicts our sharia, such as, for example, making a prostration to somebody when you greet them. We do not do that here, but the previous shara'i may have had this, such as with Yusuf alayhi salam. If we have a text which agrees with the previous shara'i, then of course the matter is simple. We follow it, as is the case, for example, with as-siyam, fasting. It was prescribed to those before us. And then there could be those matters which are mansukh, abrogated. For example, in some shara'i before us, if your clothing had some najasa on it, you had to cut it off. So that ruling is not for us. Our sharia is much more flexible. What about those matters in which the text remains silent? The rajih, the weightier opinion, is that yes, we are allowed to follow those rules. Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us, أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَى اللَّهُ فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِهِ. Those are the ones that Allah guided, speaking about the previous prophets. So take your example from their guidance. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ teaching us that the best fasting is the fasting of Dawood, and the best prayer is the prayer of Dawood ﷺ. He used to fast one day and leave off fasting. That is to say, fast on alternate days. Likewise, with the nighttime prayer, he would sleep half the night, then pray for a third, and sleep the last 1/6. And the Prophet is encouraging us to follow his example. And the fifth source of law is the madhhab al-sahabi, the madhhab of a sahabi. Is his opinion something that we can take? If the sahabi is someone who learned from the Prophet much, so we're talking about an eminent sahabi, we're not talking about someone who just saw the Prophet for a minute. No, it needs to be somebody who actually learnt something substantial from the Prophet. Then certainly his statements and opinions can be taken as law because they knew better than we did. This is the case as long as his opinion does not oppose a similar sahabi of a similar status, and neither does it oppose the established text of the Quran and the Sunnah. And then besides, the Prophet ﷺ told us to take our example from his successors. These are not only the four khulafa, but also the other many eminent companions who are full of knowledge. But what happens when there's a difference of opinion amongst the companions? A famous example would be the inheritance of the grandfather, along with the siblings of the deceased. Is it obligatory upon us to take one of their opinions, as Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, or is it the case that we can come up with a completely new opinion that none of the Sahaba have supported? And this is the view of Al-Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah. So there's a dispute there, but we say that a statement of a Sahabi can be taken as an evidence if the conditions are met. And lastly, this is the sixth one, the source of Islamic law being urf, the customs of the people. We say yes, the customs of the people can inform the ahkam of the sharia in terms of how you define things and the details and the nitty-gritty aspects of the law, and in terms of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, such as, for example, clothing. You do not want to wear the libas al-shuhra, clothing which stands out as something unusual. Well, this is defined by the customs. So we say that yes, they can be taken as a source of law as long as it does not oppose anything of the sharia, because many customs have elements which oppose the sharia, such as drinking alcohol and gambling and free mixing and so on. So that condition needs to be observed. Also, this custom needs to be across the whole land. It mustn't just be specific to one particular community. That will not be regarded as a custom of a land. And it must not be the case that the custom of one particular community opposes the customs of another particular community in the same land. In this case, we say that this is not a custom. So when we talk about customs, we're talking about something that is continuous throughout the land and that there is widespread agreement. So there you go. These are the 6 sources of law which are less well known or in which there is a difference of opinion. This leaves us with the 4 main sources of law which we want to get onto later on. But before that, the word ahkam, plural of hukum, means qada, judgment. That is linguistically. What about istilahan, or the technical sense? It is defined as follows. It is what is necessitated by the address of the Sharia pertaining to the actions of the mukallaf in terms of making a request, giving a choice, or stipulating conditions. So that's the technical definition. It's a bit complex without giving examples, so let's explain this further. The address of the Sharia is simply what is in the Quran and the authentic Sunnah. So the address from the Quran and authentic Sunnah, it necessitates certain things. This address is pertaining to the actions of the mukallaf. The mukallaf is simply the baligh and aqil. When it comes to actions, what this does not include is aqidah, because aqidah is something in the mind. It is not something physical. So this address pertaining to the actions of the mukallaf, as opposed to the child or the insane, will make certain requirements. It could demand that you do something. Aqimus salah, establish the salah. It may demand you do not do something. La taqrabu zina, do not even come close to fornication. So here you are not given a choice. You absolutely must obey. And if you do not, there will be dire consequences. And if you do obey, there will be much happiness and joy. Or this address can also give you a choice to do something. That is the permissibility of a matter. So such as, for example, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. Allah has made bay' halal, that's selling and trading. This is halal. He's not ordering you to do it. He's not ordering you not to do it. He's just saying that it is halal, so it's right there in the middle. As for riba, he has made it haram, so he's ordering you not to practice this evil act. And the third element of the address is the idea of laying down conditions or preventative factors which will determine whether this action you have performed is sahih, valid, or fasid, which is invalid. If it is, for example, invalid, it means you have to perform it again if it is an act of ibadah. This last part is called ahkam wad'iyya, and we are to speak about that later on. But just to give a few examples to illustrate what we are talking about, Salatul Dhuhr cannot be prayed until the sun inclines from its zenith. So if you pray before that, your salah is fasida. If you pray after that, your salah is sahiha. What made the difference? The inclination of the sun from its zenith. But now comes the question, who decided that the inclination from the zenith is the time for Salatul Dhuhr? The answer is that Allah Jalla wa Ala placed this as the sign for Salatul Dhuhr beginning. It is what Allah Jalla wa Ala places to tell us that an action is valid or invalid. So it's all about placing something or putting something in place. Another example, we know trading is halal, and the asl or the default ruling is that trade is valid. But supposing now a person upon whom Salatul Jumu'ah is wajib continues to trade after the adhan of Salatul Jumu'ah when the Imam comes to the mimbar. Any trade taking place after that time is invalid, because what is obligatory upon him is to stop trading and come to the khutbah, as is mentioned in Surah Al-Jumu'ah clearly. So the question is, who decided that his trade is invalid and that there is no transferal of ownership? The answer is Allah put in place this rule or this hukum that any trade after the adhan of Jumu'ah is invalid. because you have to come to the khutbah. So it's all about Allah Jalla wa Ala placing certain rules which decide whether your actions are valid or invalid. And all of this pertains to ahkam wad'iyah, which is a separate talking point coming later. Okay, so that's the definition out of the way. The next point to note is that the ahkam can be divided into two broad types, ahkam taklifiyah and ahkam wad'iyah. The ahkam taklifiyah give you the ruling on a particular action. So these are of 5 types: muharram, meaning completely forbidden; makruh, which is something detested; mubah, something permissible; mustahab, recommended; and wajib, obligatory. So you can see that this ruling is the one most people are familiar with when they ask questions. Is this halal? Is this allowed or not allowed? What they're really asking about is the hukum taklifi. As for the word taklif, from which comes the word mukallaf, then it simply means to burden someone with something. So when you have to do something or must not do something, this is a type of burdening. But what about things which are permissible, just plainly permissible? Is this a burden? Well, you could ask, how is this a burden if you do not have to do it? Well, things which are mubah still come under the heading of hukum taklifi because you still have to believe that it is mubah, it is permissible. You are not allowed to believe, for example, that drinking water is haram. In fact, this could be kufr. So you are still burdened with believing that things are halal or that certain things are mubah. Okay, so let's go through each of these 5 rulings and define what they are. First of all, al-wajib. In the language, wajib has 2 meanings. Firstly, it could mean something that falls, as in the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala, فَاذْكُرُ اسْمَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهَا صَوَافَ فَإِذَا وَجَبَتْ جُنُوبُهَا فَكُلُوا مِنْهَا وَأَطْعِمُوا الْقَانِعَ وَالْمُعْتَرِ. Make mention the name of Allah as the sacrificial animals are lined up in rows. Then when the sides of the animals fall down, that is after you sacrifice them, the word wajabat is used, fall down, then eat from the meat and give to the poor, the one who does not ask you and the one who does ask you. And the second meaning in the language is something which you must adhere to. So what is the definition then technically in the fiqhi sense? And we say that the definition technically is what the shari', the lawgiver, that is Allah Jalla wa Ala, orders to be done by way of obligation. Note, when we say that the lawgiver is Allah Jalla wa Ala, the Prophet is included in following Allah because the one who obeys the Prophet obeys Allah. مَن يُطِعِ الرَّسُولَ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهَ. Whoever obeys the Messenger has obeyed Allah. And we say it's an order by way of obligation. This discludes an order by way of recommendation. And it would also disclude anything which is muharram or makruh, because Allah Jalla wa Ala does not order you to do that which is haram nor makruh. So what about if a non-shari' orders you to do something? For example, a teacher orders you to do your homework. That's certainly an order by way of obligation, but it is not called wajib in the technical sense, even if people may call it wajib in the customary sense. And in the Arabic language, your homework from school is called wajib. The word wajib technically does have other synonyms to it as well. So you would hear the word fard or farida or hatam, which is something that absolutely must be done, or lazim, which again means something you must adhere to. All of these have the same meaning in the technical sense. Okay, so that was a definition of wajib. Next question is, what results from a wajib? Or what is the ruling on performing a wajib action? And we say that the one who performs a wajib action, intending the reward from Allah Jalla wa Ala, is worthy of reward, and the one who leaves it off, knowing the ruling, meaning knowing that he has to perform it, and he still leaves it off, is worthy of punishment. We say worthy because it could be that you do not perform a wajib action and yet Allah Jalla wa Ala still forgives you. As for if you perform a wajib action with all the conditions intact, then Allah Jalla wa Ala never wastes the actions of those who do good. Their reward is secured. Yes, it is true in this world we do not know if our reward is secured. We cannot be certain that Allah Jalla wa Ala has definitely accepted our righteous actions, but what we do have is hope, and that is genuine hope as opposed to wishful thinking, which is hope without any effort. The reward given for performing a wajib action is greater than the reward given for a recommended action. The evidence for this is the authentic hadith, مَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُ عَلَيْهِ. The servant of mine does not draw closer to me with anything more beloved than the obligatory actions which I have enjoined on him. Also, just note that some scholars said that wajib is something which is established by a definitive proof about which there is no doubt, so something which is mutawatir. And as for a fard, it is established by something which is not mutawatir. But this opinion is weak, there's no basis for it. Rather, wajib and fard are both the same thing. It does not matter as to the strength of the evidence, or whether the evidence gives off certainty or dhann. The second of the hukum taklifi is al-mandub. In the language, al-mandub means that which is called upon. And technically it means that which the Shari' orders you to do, not by way of obligation. So examples of that would be the rawatib salah, which accompany the 5 fard salawat in a day and night. Or for example, fasting the 6th of Shawwal after Ramadan. And what is the ruling on the mandub? It is that the one who does it, seeking the reward of Allah Jalla wa Ala, will be rewarded, and the one who does not do it is not worthy of punishment. So doing any righteous action, not seeking the reward of Allah Jalla wa Ala, but rather doing it for other reasons, for example, it may be seen as customarily a good thing to do, then such a person is not worthy of reward from Allah. And we're talking about the reward which is put on your scales on Yawm al-Qiyamah. The Prophet ﷺ said, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّكَ لَا تُنْفِقُ نَفَقَةً تَبْتَغِي بِهَا وَجْهَ اللَّهِ إِلَّا أُجِرْتَ عَلَيْهَا حَتَّى مَا تَجْعَلُهُ فِي امْرَأَتِكَ. He told Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas that you should know that you will not spend anything seeking the face of Allah, meaning seeking to see the face of Allah in Jannah, except that you will be rewarded for it, even the morsel of food which you feed your wife. However, one might ask that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah said that the one who does not pray his witr is a man of evil, and his testimony should not be accepted. These are clearly heavy words. What do we make of this? Well, we could say either Imam Ahmad held that Salatul Witr is wajib, so the one who does not perform the wajib, then it is clear he is not adl, he is not a just person, and his testimony should not be accepted. And this is an opinion in the Hanbali madhab. A second way of looking at it would be to say that this person who does not pray the Salatul Witr, and the least number of raka'at is simply 1. So if he cannot even pray 1 raka'ah in a day, which has to be the easiest salah of them all, then it shows that he is somebody who is taking his deen lightly, he's lazy, he's not too committed. And because of Imam Ahmad's high standards, he is not a person worthy to stand as a witness in a court of law. One might ask a question, how is mandub a taklif, where taklif means where you're burdened to do something? How is it a burdening when you do not have to do it? And the answer is that a taklif is when you have to adhere to what the Sharia tells you to do. And even though with a mandub you do not have to do it, it is still something that the Sharia asks you to do, even if it does not obligate you. So it is burdening you in a sense, simply because it's asking you to perform that action. And the word al-mandub has other words as well, masnoon and mustahab and nafl, and also simply sunnah. But let it be known that the word sunnah can be used to denote wajib, as for example the statement of Anas, who says it is from the sunnah that when a man marries a virgin he stays with her for 7 nights, and when he marries a non-virgin he stays with her for 3 nights. The word sunnah is certainly used, but it denotes wajib. But most of the time when the fuqaha use the word sunnah, what they really mean is mandub or mustahab. Also know that from the scholars are those who say that masnoon is established by a text and mustahab is not established by a text per se, but rather established by the ijtihad of a scholar. However, most of the usuliyun do not make a distinction between masnoon and mustahab. So all of these words are the same. Okay, now let us move on to the third hukum, which is al-muharram. In the language it means mamnu', that which is banned or prevented. And in the technical sense, it is that which the shari' has forbidden by way of obligation, such as, for example, drinking khamr or gambling and the like. And what is the ruling on al-muharram? It is that the one who leaves it off out of obedience to Allah Jalla wa Ala is rewarded, and the one who commits the action knowing that it is haram is worthy of punishment. And again, we say he's worthy of punishment because Allah Jalla wa Ala can forgive him for free. The only sin not forgiven in the akhirah is shirk. So as for leaving off a muharram action, then it is only reward worthy if done for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala. For example, a person wants to drink alcohol because that's what he desires, but then he remembers Allah's command that it is haram, and he leaves it off for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala. This person is rewarded. Otherwise, you could have a kafir who leaves off drinking alcohol because of its poisonous effects. So he's doing it for health reasons. He's not doing it for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Such a person is not reward worthy. If you want reward from Allah, then your actions have to be for His sake alone. Okay, what about a person who leaves it off because it didn't occur to him to do it in the first place? He was just heedless in the very first place. For example, it never occurred to him to go gambling. So he's never gambled because it never occurred to him to gamble. Such a person is not reward worthy. And even worse than that would be a person who wants to do it and leaves it off because of a preventative factor. For example, a person goes to the casino to gamble, but he finds that the casino is closed, so he returns back home. He has left off gambling, but not for the sake of Allah, rather because of an external preventative factor. Now the ruling here is that because he had the means to commit the gambling, he is punished as if he actually physically gambled because he had the means, as opposed to a person who is poor from the very start. So he does not have the means to gamble, but he has in his heart the intention that if I had money, I would certainly gamble with it. Such a person is not punished for the actual physical gambling because he does not have the means. However, he is punished for that evil intention of his, which is not as bad as the previous example, but it is still a negative position to be in. And the next ruling is al-makruh, which in the language means something which is hated or detested. It appears in the Quran, for example, وَلَكِنْ كَرِهَ اللَّهُمْ بِعَاثَهُمْ فَثَبَّتَهُمْ. But Allah hated for them to march out with you, so He held them back. And technically, it means that which the Sharia forbids, but not by way of obligation, such as giving and taking with the left hand, and such as staying up after Salatul Isha, because then you go to sleep later and there's a chance that you will miss the Salatul Fajr. And what is the ruling on al-makruh? We say that the one who does it in obedience to Allah Jalla wa Ala, so the intention matters here, is rewarded, and the one who does not perform this action is not liable for punishment. And finally we have al-mubah. In the language, al-mubah means mu'lan, that which is announced. So when you come out with it openly or announce something openly. This is the opposite of keeping something a secret. And also, in the language it means al-ma'dhun, that which is permitted. As for technically, it is simply that which is neither ordered nor forbidden in and of itself, such as drinking milk. But notice what we said here, in and of itself, because that which is permissible may well become wajib due to an external factor. For example, drinking milk is permissible. However, if your life is at stake, so for example you're about to die of thirst, then here it becomes wajib for you to drink milk if milk is the only thing available to you, because it is wajib for you to save your life. Walking is permissible, but walking to the masjid at the salah time, if you live close enough, becomes wajib. So that particular walk is wajib for you. So it becomes wajib due to an external factor. Walking to a nightclub is haram. So this walking becomes haram due to an external factor. Buying water is mubah, but purchasing water in order to make wudu, if you have no other water, is wajib. So you see, it's due to an external factor. Okay, and what is the ruling on that which is mubah? We say al-mubah is something in which neither reward nor punishment rides on it. Mubah can also be called halal or jaiz. They all mean the same thing. The Quran does seem to use the word halal more often than the word mubah, as in, for example, al-yawma uhilla lakum at-tayyibat. Today, the tayyibat, the goodly things, have become halal for you. Likewise, he's saying, وَيُحِلُّ لَهُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَيُحَرِّمُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْخَبَائِثِ. He, meaning the Prophet, makes halal the tayyibat and makes haram the khaba'ith, or the impure, unwholesome things. Also, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تُحَرِّمُوا طَيِّبَاتِ مَا أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. O you who have iman, do not make haram the tayyibat of what Allah has made halal for you. And again, the reason why it is a taklifi issue, the mubah, is because you are at least burdened to believe that it is mubah, because believing that it is haram is actually kufr. So for example, believing that eating bread is haram can actually be kufr if you declare it to be so, because then you're making the halal into haram. So no doubt you are burdened into believing that it is mubah. Okay, now let us talk about the second type of ahkam, which are the ahkam wad'iyya. Wada'a means to place something or to put something down. So what are these types of ahkam? Well, this is as follows. It is that which the shari', the lawgiver, has put down or laid down as a sign for an action to be valid or invalid. This action could be an act of ibadah or a non-act of ibadah, such as a trade or any other contract for that matter. Now, we did give some examples before, and there are many examples that can be given. So, for example, in inheritance, who inherits from you? Your biological relatives. So this qaraba, or the act of being a biological relative, is a sabab, or a cause for inheritance. Who decided that the qaraba should be a cause for inheritance? It is Allah Jalla wa Ala alone who decides. He could have decided that your next door neighbor inherits from you. That's up to Allah Jalla wa Ala to decide. But He so decided that your qaraba inherit from you, that this will be one of the asbab, one of the causes for inheritance. But on the opposite side of the coin, if you have a relative who is a close relative, but he's a kafir, does he now inherit? The answer is no, because this kufr is a preventative factor from your inheritance, so the inheritance would not be correct or valid. But who decides what this preventative factor should be, in this case kufr? It is Allah Jalla wa Ala alone who decides. He could have decided that a person who is a relative of yours, even if he is a kafir, still inherits, but He decided what He decided. So you see, it is Allah Jalla wa Ala laying down these conditions and preventative factors and these stipulations which determine whether an act is valid or invalid. The hukm wad'i has 10 elements to it. Let's go through them. Sabab, shart, mani', sihha, fasad, azima, rukhsa, ada, qada, and i'ada. We're going to have to explain these one by one. So, ada means when you perform an act of ibadah in its proper time. Qada means you perform an act of ibadah not in its proper time. And i'ada means when you repeat an act of ibadah, or any act which is invalid. So you have to repeat it. For example, praying without wudu means you have to repeat that act. And the reason why these three are from the ahkam wad'iyah is because, remember, who decides what is the correct time to perform an act of ibadah? It is Allah Jalla wa Ala. He places the proper time, which would then determine whether your act is an ada, qada, or i'ada, because you have not met the conditions for an act to be sahih, so therefore it is fasid, which would require you to do the act again. So again, you see, with these three rulings, it all does revolve around an act being correct or incorrect, or whether it is done in the proper time or not. And all of this is placed or laid down by Allah Jalla wa Ala. Also we have azima and rukhsa. Azima is a firm obligation, and a rukhsa is lightening of the load in opposition to the azima. So for example, Salatul Dhuhr is 4 raka'at. That is an azima. However, this can be reduced to 2 raka'at or shortened. That is a rukhsa. So again, who decides when the Salatul Dhuhr can be shortened to 2 raka'at? What is the cause, the sabab for this? Which is a journey, of course. Allah Jalla wa Ala decides that the journey is the sabab for shortening the salah, and hence giving you the rukhsa. Eating pork is haram, but eating it when you're about to die is a rukhsa and therefore halal. So in a case of necessity, so when you have a necessity, this necessity becomes a sabab or a cause to make the haram into halal. So again, we're talking about a sabab, which is definitely part of the ahkam wad'iyah, because it is Allah Jalla wa Ala who places these asbab, these causes, into their places. We do not have that authority. Okay, now let's talk about as-sahih, which is also from the ahkam wad'iyah. As-sahih in the language means that which is correct. It can also mean being free from illness, so when you're healthy as opposed to when you're ill. In the technical sense, when something is sahih, the consequences of that actions result, whether that action is an ibadah or other than that. That's the definition. Now, just to explain this further, if an act of ibadah is sahih, it simply means you have discharged your obligation to perform that act. So if you pray your salah, meeting all the conditions and requirements, then your act is sahih, you have discharged your obligation, and no one has the right to tell you to do it again. Also, if a contract is sahih, it simply means that the effects of the contract are in play. So for example, a sales contract. What are the effects of a sales contract? Well, there's a transferal of ownership. So therefore, if a trade contract is sahih, we say that a transferal of ownership has taken place. Whereas if a sales contract is batil or fasid, then a transferal of ownership is not in place, has not taken place. We also have from the ahkam wad'iyah shart, which in the language means a sign, alama, as in the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala, فَقَدْ جَاءَ أَشْرَاطُهَا, its signs have come, meaning of Yawm al-Qiyamah. And technically what it means is that which, if it is present, the act is not necessarily present, but if it is not present, then the act definitely is not present. So for example, tahara is a shart, a condition for the salah. If the tahara is present, so you're in a state of wudu, does this definitely mean that the salah will be present? The answer is no. You could be in a state of wudu and yet not praying. However, if you're not in a state of wudu, does it definitely hold that the salah also is not present? The answer is yes. No wudu means definitely no salah. We also have a mani', a preventative factor, which is defined as follows: that which if it is present, the act is definitely not present. But if it is absent, the act is not necessarily absent. So for example, menstruation is a preventative factor for the prayer and the fasting. So if the menstruation is present, the act, in this case let's say the fasting, is definitely not present. Whereas if the menstruation is not present, we cannot say the act is definitely not present or is present. In other words, it may or may not be present. A woman may not be in menstruation and yet at the same time not be praying or not be fasting. Another example we can give, the prohibited times of the salah. This is a preventative factor. It prevents you from praying a nafila salah. So when the forbidden time is present, there is definitely no nafila salah which is valid. But if the forbidden time is not present, then that does not mean that the salah is definitely present, because you could be outside the prohibited times and yet still not praying. And then we also have a sabab, which means a cause, and this is defined as follows: that which if it is present, the act is definitely present, and if it is not present, the act is definitely not present. An example would be the hilal of Ramadan means that the fasting of Ramadan is definitely present. And if the hilal of Ramadan is not present, it means the fasting of Ramadan is definitely not present. So you can see from this that the shart and mani' are opposites, whereas the sabab is something in between. And finally, from the ahkam wad'iyah is what we call al-fasid, which is the opposite of as-sahih. In the language, al-fasid simply means going to waste. And technically it means that which has no consequences resulting from it, whether it be an act of ibadah or a contract. We'll continue talking about fasid in a little while, but before that, let us make mention of the differences between a hukum taklifi and a hukum wada'i, just for further clarification. We'll mention 4 differences. Number 1, a hukum taklifi is a request. So for example, sit down or do not sit down. This is a request. Whereas a hukum wada'i is not a request. It is simply an information item or a declarative sentence, something that gives you information. For example, it will rain tomorrow. This is not a request. It is simply a declaration or something which gives you information. So for example, when we say that tahara is a condition for the salah to be correct, it is not a request to make tahara. It is simply giving you an information item, though it itself is not directly a request. Similarly, sunset is a condition for the maghrib to be correct, so it is incorrect before sunset. This is not a request. It is simply giving you an information. So this idea about the sabab, shart and mani', it's all ikhbar, declarative sentences. Difference number 2, in a hukum taklifi, the qudra and ilm matter. For example, praying standing up is wajib, but if you're unable to due to an ailment, you can pray sitting down. So in this case, you did not have the qudra. Likewise with knowledge. You cannot say that a hukum taklifi applies to you when you do not even have knowledge of it. Many men do not have knowledge that growing the beard is wajib. So we cannot say that they are disobeying Allah Jalla wa Ala when they do not even know what the rules are. On the other hand, in a hukum wada'i, qudra and knowledge are not a condition for the rule to hold. For example, inheritance. The cause for inheritance, like we said before, is qaraba. So when a relative of yours dies, you inherit from him, even if you did not know that he's dead. You have de facto inherited from him. Similarly with divorce. When a husband pronounces a divorce, the woman is divorced, even if she does not know about it. The rule still applies because we're talking about a sabab. Similarly, Ramadan. When the hilal is seen, Ramadan begins. Even if you did not know that the hilal has been seen, Ramadan has still begun. All of this does not pertain to your knowledge nor your ability. Difference number 3. In a hukum taklifi, you have to be a mukallaf for it to apply to you. So for example, the salah. If you're not a mukallaf, salah is not obligatory upon you. The hukum taklifi on a salah is that it is wajib, but it does not apply to a child or an insane person. It is not wajib upon them. Whereas with a hukum wada'i, the taklif is not a condition. For example, zakah given on the wealth of a child. A child is not a mukallaf, but the condition of the zakah is that the nisab is reached and the hawl has been completed. If that happens on the wealth of a child, let's say a 3-year-old, then zakah is due. Even though the 3-year-old does not have any knowledge of this matter, neither does he have the ability to carry out this zakah. On top of that, he's not even mukallaf. Yet you cannot say that the zakah is not wajib upon him, because the zakah is wajib on the wealth, not on the person. So differentiate between the wealth and the person. Similarly, if a child or a mad person destroys somebody's wealth, do we say they do not need to pay anything back because they are not mukallaf? No. Damages must be sought. And fourthly, pertaining to reward and punishment, in a hukum taklifi, the one who performs the act is worthy of the reward or punishment. So if you perform the salah, you are worthy of the reward. If you gamble, you are worthy of the punishment, and so on. That is clear enough to understand. But with the hukum wad'i, somebody other than the one who does the action could bear the brunt. An example of this is the aqila. In an accidental murder, the aqila, who are the asaba from the father's side, and these are the asaba bin nafs, they pay the blood money if the blood money is 1/3 or more of the total blood money, even though they themselves did not do anything wrong. That is because the sabab, or the cause for paying the blood money, is accidental murder. This is the sabab which has been laid down. Who laid it down? Allah Jalla wa Ala laid it down. Okay, let us take some review questions. Question number 1. Explain the 5 types of hukum taklifi, both in terms of the definition and their ruling. Question 2. Just mention the 10 types of hukum wad'i. Question number 3. Mention the differences between a hukum wad'i and a hukum taklifi.